year, we have been putting together this talk on the art of conversation. With the advent of social media and our growing reliance on instant messaging like Twitter, iMessage, and Snapchat, good conversation has truly become a lost art. Today's culture emphasizes speed and efficiency, and this has resulted in quick, meaningless interactions with strangers and friends alike. The purpose of today's talk is to try to encourage you all not to communicate more, but to communicate better. So the first thing we have prepared today is a video by Celeste Headley, who's going to share 10 rules on how to have a better conversation.
See a show of hands. How many of you have unfriended someone on Facebook because they said something offensive about politics or religion, childcare, food? And how many of you know at least one person that you avoid because you just don't want to talk to them? You know, it used to be that in order to have a polite conversation, we just had to follow the advice of Henry Higgins and My Fair Lady, stick to the weather and your health. But these days, with climate change and anti-vaxxing, those subjects are not safe either. So this world that we live in, this world in which every conversation has the potential to devolve into an argument, where our politicians can't speak to one another, and where even the most trivial of issues have someone fighting both passionately for it and against it, it's not normal. Pew Research did a study of 10,000 American adults, and they found that at this moment, we are more polarized, we are more divided than we ever have been in history. We're less likely to compromise, which means we're not listening to each other, and we make decisions about where to live, who to marry, and even who our friends are going to be based on what we already believe. Again, that means we're not listening to each other. A conversation requires a balance between talking and listening, and somewhere along the way, we lost that balance. Now, part of that is due to technology, the smartphones that you all either have in your hands or close enough that you could grab them really quickly. According to Pew Research, about a third of American teenagers send more than 100 texts a day. And many of them, almost most of them, are more likely to text their friends than they are to talk to them face to face. There's this great piece in The Atlantic. It was written by a high school teacher named Paul Barnwell. And he gave his kids a communication project. He wanted to teach them how to speak on a specific subject without using notes. And he said this: I came to realize that conversational competence might be the single most overlooked skill we fail to teach. Kids spend hours each day engaging with ideas and each other through screens, but rarely do they have an opportunity to hone their interpersonal communication skills. It might sound like a funny question, but we have to ask ourselves, is there any 21st century skill more important than being able to sustain coherent, confident conversation? Now, I make my living talking to people. Nobel Prize winners, truck drivers, billionaires, kindergarten teachers, heads of state, plumbers. I talk to people that I like. I talk to people that I don't like. I talk to some people that I disagree with deeply on a personal level, but I still have a great conversation with them. So I'd like to spend the next 10 minutes or so teaching you how to talk and how to listen. Many of you have already heard a lot of advice on this. Things like look the person in the eye, think of interesting topics to discuss in advance, nod and smile to show that you're paying attention. Repeat back what you just heard or summarize it. So I want you to forget all of that. It is crap. There is no reason to learn how to show you're paying attention if you are, in fact, paying attention. Now, I actually use the exact same skills as a professional interviewer that I do in regular life. So I'm going to teach you how to interview people, and that's actually going to help you learn how to be better conversationalists. Learn to have a conversation without wasting your time, without getting bored, and please God, without offending anybody. We've all had really great conversations. We've had them before. We know what it's like. The kind of conversation where you walk away feeling engaged and inspired, or where you feel like you've made a real connection or you've been perfectly understood. There is no reason why most of your interactions can't be like that. So I have 10 basic rules. I'm going to walk you through all of them, but honestly, if you just choose one of them and master it, you're already going to enjoy better conversations. Number 1, don't multitask. And I don't mean just set down your cell phone or your tablet or your car keys or whatever's in your hand. I mean, be present. Be in that moment. Don't be thinking about your argument you have with your boss. Don't be thinking about what you're going to have for dinner. If you want to get out of the conversation, get out of the conversation. But don't be half in it and half out of it. Number 2, don't pontificate. If you wanted to state your opinion without any opportunity for response or argument or pushback or growth, write a blog. Now, there's a really good reason why I don't allow pundits on my show, because they're really boring. If they're a conservative, they're going to hate Obama and food stamps and abortion. If they're a liberal, they're going to hate big banks and oil corporations and Dick Cheney. Totally predictable. And you don't want to be like that. You need to enter every conversation assuming that you have something to learn. The famed therapist Ed Scott Peck said that true listening requires a setting aside of oneself. And sometimes that means setting aside your personal opinion. He said that sensing this acceptance, the speaker will become less and less vulnerable and more likely to open up the inner recesses of his or her mind to the listener. Again, assume that you have something to learn. Bill Nye, everyone you will ever meet knows something that you don't. I put it this way: everybody is an expert in something. Number 3, use open-ended questions. In this case, take a cue from journalists. Start your questions with who, what, where, when, why, or how. If you put in a complicated question, you're going to get a simple answer out. If I ask you, were you terrified? You're going to respond to the most powerful word in that sentence, which is terrified. And the answer is, yes, I was, or no, I wasn't. Were you angry? Yes, I was very angry. Let them describe it. They're the ones that know. Try asking them things like, what was that like? How did that feel? Because then they might have to stop for a moment and think about it. And you're going to get a much more interesting response. Number 4, go with the flow. That means thoughts will come into your mind and you need to let them go out of your mind. We've heard interviews often in which a guest is talking for several minutes and then the host comes back in and asks a question which seems like it comes out of nowhere or it's already been answered. That means the host probably stopped listening 2 minutes ago because he thought of this really clever question and he was just bound and determined to say that. And we do the exact same thing. We're sitting there having a conversation with someone and then we remember that time that we met Hugh Jackman in a coffee shop. And we stop listening. Stories and ideas are going to come to you. You need to let them come and let them go. Number 5, if you don't know, say that you don't know. Now, people on the radio, especially on NPR, are much more aware that they're going on the record. And so they're more careful about what they claim to be an expert in and what they claim to know for sure. Do that. Err on the side of caution. Talk should not be cheap. Number 6, don't equate your experience with theirs. If they're talking about having lost a family member, don't start talking about the time that you lost a family member. If they're talking about the trouble that they're having at work, don't tell them about how much you hate your job. It's not the same. It is never the same. All experiences are individual. And more importantly, it is not about you. You don't need to take that moment to prove how amazing you are or how much you've suffered. Somebody asked Stephen Hawking once what his IQ was, and he says, I have no idea. People who brag about their IQs are losers. Conversations are not a promotional opportunity. Number 7, try not to repeat yourself. It's condescending and it's really boring. And we tend to do it a lot, especially in work conversations or in conversations with our kids. We have a point to make, so we just keep rephrasing it over and over. Don't do that. Number 8, stay out of the weeds. Frankly, people don't care about the years, the names, the dates, all those details that you're struggling to come up with in your mind. They don't care. What they care about is you. They care about what you're like, what you have in common. So forget the details. Leave them out. Number 9, this is not the last one, but it is the most important one. Listen. I cannot tell you how many really important people have said that listening is perhaps the number one most important skill that you could develop. Buddha said, and I'm paraphrasing, if your mouth is open, you're not learning. And Calvin Coolidge said, no man ever listened his way out of a job. Why do we not listen to each other? Number one, we'd rather talk. When I'm talking, I'm in control. I don't have to hear anything I'm not interested in. I'm the center of attention. I can bolster my own identity. But there's another reason. We get distracted. The average person talks at about 225 words per minute, but we can listen at up to 500 words per minute. So our minds are filling in those other 275 words. And look, I know it takes effort and energy to actually pay attention to someone. But if you can't do that, you're not in a conversation. You're just two people shouting out barely related sentences in the same place. You have to listen to one another. Stephen Covey said it very beautifully. He said, most of us don't listen with the intent to understand. We listen with the intent to reply. One more rule, and number 10, and it's this one. Be brief. This boils down to the same basic concept, and it is this one. Be interested in other people. You know, I grew up with a very famous grandfather, and there was kind of a ritual in my home. People would come over to talk to my grandparents, and after they would leave, my mother would come over to us and she'd say, do you know who that was? She was the runner-up to Miss America. He was the mayor of Sacramento. She won a Pulitzer Prize. He's a Russian ballet dancer. And I kind of grew up assuming everyone has some hidden amazing thing about them. And honestly, I think it's what makes me a better host. I keep my mouth shut as often as I possibly can. I keep my mind open, and I'm always prepared to be amazed, and I'm never disappointed. You do the same thing. Go out, talk to people, listen to people, and most importantly, be prepared to be amazed. Thanks.
Our first speakers are going to be Jack Drinker, Toby Kamish, and Molly DeSimone from Comedy Sports.
Hello, everybody.
Hello, everyone. I am Molly DeSimone, and I am a co-manager of Comedy Sports, and I'm a senior.
I'm Jack Drinker. I'm the other co-manager of Comedy Sports, and I'm a senior as well.
Hi, my name is Toby Kamish. I am a senior, and I am the president of Improv Club.
And some of you might not know what Comedy Sports is. So you might be wondering, what is Comedy Sports? Well, Comedy Sports is a competitive improv team. We audition people. Right now we have the biggest team we've ever had in the past few years of 27 people with all grades. There's other schools in the area we have matches with. We practice twice a week for about 2 hours.
So, what is the definition of improv? To improvise, according to Webster's dictionary, means to compose, recite, play, or sing extemporaneously, to make, invent, or arrange offhand, to make or fabricate out of what is conveniently on hand. So really, we improvise each and every single day, whether we're talking to our doctors, our friends, our teachers, our lawyers, whatever. We even improvise in how we walk. If there's an object in the way, of course, we're going to step around it. You got to think, react, and take in for consideration your environment and your surroundings. So you are actively listening through your ears, eyes, whatever. You're just improvising.
So, enough about talking about improvising. We're actually going to improvise for you.
All right, we're gonna need a suggestion during this.
All right, can I get something that will fit in something that would be the size of a bread box? You.
Bread.
Okay, bread. Bread is your suggestion.
You're in this too.
Oh, okay. Gee whiz. I love making bread here at this bread factory. Man, I wish my grandma would come along. She's really good at making bread.
Gerald, I'm so excited that a 9-year-old woman like me can still work in the good old bread factory.
Gee whiz, Grandma. You're amazing. I'm glad you remember the recipe. This is really good bread. So good. Such good bread. Really, the best bread I've ever had in my life. Gee, Grandma.
Something happened to the recipe box. Grandma, so it's kind of empty.
It's okay, I remember exactly what it is. I'll write it down.
But you remember the recipe for the bread, but in here we also have recipes for the coffee bread. And that's our bestseller. And I accidentally dropped it in the paper shredder. And now we lost the recipe to our very, very most best-selling bread.
Well, how about we just put our heads together and we all improvise and we make something off the top of our heads. We've made it a billion times.
A billion times.
Billions of bread made right here in this bread factory.
Grandma, I think if we all think and remember, because we all listen to each other when we make the bread, we should remember it.
I remember an experience a long time ago when Grandma was teaching me how to make bread. There was wheat and flour all over the floor, and we need wheat and flour, Grandma. Wheat and flour.
There was wheat and flour on the floor, and
flour.
There was sugar and coffee on the counter.
Coffee beans, and let me just
So
blend
many
them.
beans. Just
Zip, zip, zip,
out
zip.
of the blue, everywhere.
Perfectly blended. And
That looks like formula.
Ooh,
and the last thing we need is, I remember, it's what gives it the greatest taste that everyone loves. I gotta look. Cinnamon.
Cinnamon. It's a coffee cake.
Let's put it in the oven.
Beep, bop, boop, bop, beep.
And scene.
Not one of our greatest scenes, but
You got the point.
yeah. So in that scene, generally in a lot of our scenes, there is a lot of actively listening. When one of us goes into the scene, we generally try to set up the scene, and what that entails is setting up the environment so that we are essentially giving gifts or setting up breadcrumbs for our fellow improvisers to come in and build off of that agenda. So essentially, when one person sets up the scene, they are giving gifts to other people so that they can make jokes, assumptions, or whatever, and really take things to the next level. So obviously, we were in a bakery and a bread shop. I established that there was a grandma. Jack took the note. He was actively listening that there was a grandma, and he came in as a grandma. So that was a good example of actively listening in improv.
But sometimes that doesn't always happen. So Jack and I are going to do a scene where someone is not actively listening.
Can we get another suggestion?
Apple juice.
Apple juice, thank you.
My friend Susie is supposed to get here right away. Sometimes she's late, but she's always really nice and kind, and she's my best friend, and she's going to be here any minute. I know it. I'm so excited for her to get here.
Janelle, it's your teacher. You're late for class.
That was not who I was expecting.
I don't care. You're late for class.
Okay, so that was a good example of not actively listening and not engaging with their fellow improvisers. Jack obviously wasn't listening and didn't hear that Molly was waiting for her friend to come over. Jack completely took over the scene and forced his own agenda of being the teacher and being in the classroom setting. That is a good example, and it even reflects what the previous speaker was saying with trying to, essentially go with the flow of the scene. So Molly set up something, Jack should have gone along with it instead of trying to listen, make his own joke, or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, so now we're gonna do another scene where within the scene, you know when you're having a conversation and you just know the person is not listening to you, you're talking and it's just not going in. This is gonna be an example of that in an improv scene.
Okay, one more suggestion. Alright, pickle.
The perfect size pickles for the Subway sandwich.
God, I love cucumbers. I'm gonna put them on my eyes. Ah, yeah, cucumber eyelids. This spa is great.
Scene.
Thank you.
So obviously he wasn't listening to what we set up before. We set up pickles and a sandwich shop, and he took cucumbers and a spa. So it's really easy to see when, in a scene especially, and in conversation, when someone is just not paying attention and not taking any of it in.
In improv, one of the biggest rules is yes-anding. And so what that means and entails is that you are taking in for consideration what other people are saying and you're building off of it. A big thing we like to think about is making other people look good. And I think that applies to conversations too. You want to make the other person look good. You want to make the other person feel good. And with that, it entails actively listening. And so to actively listen, you obviously want to listen. It's kind of self-explanatory. Yeah, and what that means is not forcing your own agendas, really taking in for consideration what the other person is saying so that, you can ask a question about it. And you want to understand more about what the person is saying and maybe relate your experiences to them. I know the other speaker said not to do that, but it leads to other avenues of conversation. Another thing we like to do, I pretty much covered what I wanted to say about that.
And the Comedy Sports website even says about Comedy Sports High School League. The High School League empowers students to create their own theater and nourishes their communication skills through improvisational theater workshops and performances. So you just saw how improv can help our communication skills.
Okay, so in closing, we would like to say that although listening is one of the most important rules in improv, it also pertains to everyday conversations when we get caught up in our phones and in ourselves and what we're going through, and we are not actually listening to whoever we're speaking to. So we're not really having connected conversations with our peers where we can listen, connect, and adapt to the conversation and see where it goes. So as simple as it sounds, the thing that we would like you guys to take from this would be to listen to others and be more connected and present in your everyday conversations.
Thank you to Comedy Sports, that was great. Our final speaker is an English teacher here at Miracosta, Mr. Cameron Chow.
All right, I'm gonna hold this because I like to walk around and I'm fidgety like a lot of you are. Really quickly, my message today is not going to necessarily focus on conversation skills, listening and talking back and forth to one another, but it's going to focus more on crafting a message that's valuable that you want to communicate. All right? And I'm not going to advocate that you never use social media or put your phones away, because I, like many of you, am almost never without my phone. I get some reminders from my kids sometimes that I need to put it down and pay attention to them. So that's not going to be what I'm doing. What I would like you to think about as I'm talking today is how you can create a message that's of value no matter what avenue you choose to share it with. Okay? So before I get started, some of you know me. I know some of you by looking around and seeing some of your faces. I've had some of you in my class before. But I want to introduce myself to those of you who do not know me. And as I introduce myself, I'm going to ask you to do one thing. Okay? Listen to this introduction, and even if you do know me, try and picture the type of person that is introducing themselves to you outside of what I'm saying. Okay? So, by way of introduction. I'll give you a few seconds to gather your thoughts after I'm done. My name is Cameron Chow. I am an English teacher here at Miracosta. To introduce myself, I would probably want to tell you that the greatest thing in my life, number one, is my wife, Jane. I met my wife, Jane, in the 6th grade, and we were high school sweethearts. We are celebrating our 13th anniversary this summer, but we have known each other since we were 12 years old. Right? Besides my wife, the next most important thing in my life are my 4 children. And yes, I did say 4. We were going for 3, but we got 2 on the back end, so we had twins this summer. They are the most valuable thing in my life. They are one of the reasons I'm a teacher, because of all the free time I get. I get home every day. I don't work, till late at night, unless I'm grading papers, so I try not to assign too many. And I get all summers free, and I get every holiday off. I'm very dedicated to them. I look forward to seeing them every single day, and I can't get home soon enough. Lastly, I am a teacher. It is something that I chose to do. I've been here for 7 years. I love my job. I'm very dedicated to the children in my classroom, and if you have ever walked by my classroom at any point in time during the day, it is usually full of people, of students who choose to be there also. Okay? So take 10 seconds and picture what type of person has just been introduced to you. Okay? You may think this is a dedicated father. He's passionate about his family. He must be a good person. He cares about other people, and he's doing a thankless job as a teacher. Maybe you think I'm a little bit crazy for that. Or dedicated and passionate about educating young people and helping young people to be their best selves. Okay? So now I'm going to give you another introduction. Also true. Okay? Also, all these things are true about me. And I would like you to think again about what type of person is being introduced to you. So, by way of introduction, my name is Cameron Chow. I would like to say probably one of my biggest hobbies is fitness, working out, staying in shape. I also really love sports, especially combat sports, boxing and MMA. Grew up doing them in my household and following them on television. Sometimes as a father, I lose my patience with my children and I snap at them. And oftentimes in my job as a teacher, my students frustrate me so much, I want to give up and walk out and never come back. Okay? Think about it. What type of person are you picturing? Take a few seconds. Maybe you think this person is a jock or a meathead. Maybe they should read more if they're an English teacher. Perhaps you're thinking they should have more patience and they should love the kids in their classroom. And like I said, all of these things are true. Okay? Each one of us is not just black and white. We all live our lives in a gray area. The great thing about your lives now and my life and the parents who are here is that every day we get to choose the message. Every day you get to choose the message that you share with the rest of the world about who you are and what you want people to know and understand and believe about you. We all have good traits and bad traits. And it sometimes can be hard to make sure that we've carefully considered what it is we want to communicate to the people around us. Why is this so hard? Some of the speakers have mentioned and talked about social media, but I would say that it is hard because of that phone that's sitting in your pocket right now, or some of you in your hand right now. All right? Social media gives us the ability to communicate with thousands upon thousands of people at the click of a button. The problem with social media, the one big problem, is that we don't carefully consider what we want to communicate. Social media, and all of us have maybe fallen into this trap before. Social media is reactionary, right? Something comes up, it makes us angry. We want to be the first to tweet about it, to post about it on Instagram, Snapchat with our friends. And we don't often carefully consider what it is we're saying because it is a reaction. When something is reactionary, it's based on emotions. How many of you make the best choices in your life when you're in a heightened emotional state? How many would you say you make the best choices when you're either really angry or really happy, all right, or really sad? None of us, myself included, right? And so, carefully considered communication has to be something that's at the forefront of your mind. Before I was a teacher, I was a journalist, broadcast journalism. I worked on a tiny television station, southern Utah, part of Nevada. We would go to air. We would work all day crafting these stories. We got 30 seconds. If we were really lucky, we got 90 seconds to tell someone's story on air, to talk about things that were meaningful and important to the subjects of those stories. Minute and a half, if we got a long time, 30 seconds normally. We had to carefully consider every word we used, every image that was going to go into that piece. And it taught me to be thoughtful in communication and to say things that I meant. And to be honest with you, I don't always do it correctly. Sometimes I fail. One time we ran to air so quickly, we were putting a show together, we had some major stories break, and I'm sitting behind the anchor desk, and I start reading about something that's going to happen on September 39th. I didn't look at my script. I didn't carefully consider what I was going to say. For those of you who didn't know, September 39th is not an actual date, right? So I rolled it back. I said, we're going to find out what date that actually is, and I'll get back to you. I love journalism. I was sick of bad news. I decided to go back to law school, and I moved to Los Angeles, and then decided to become a teacher because it was really something I'd always been passionate about, and I stayed away from because everybody told me you're not going to make any money. And they were right, but I still love it, okay? So I became an English teacher, and if you think about it, carefully considered communication is just as important in an English classroom as it was putting stories on air for people to watch. If I can't effectively communicate the knowledge that I want the students in my class to have, what I want them to understand, and what I want them to give back to me, there is no way they're going to be able to effectively communicate back to me what I'm asking from them. The reason I tell you these two things is because careful communication is something that I constantly think about. And as a father, I have continued to think about it. All right? How do I talk to my children? What do I want them to gain from what I'm saying? The things that I say to those little people in my house, are they of value in helping them grow? Being a father has helped me to be a teacher, and being a teacher has helped me to be a father. One of the things that I notice oftentimes about kids is that you are mistaken in the message that you want to send. So in my class, in English classroom, a lot of you probably do this in your English class. You have journals or you write in journal entries and you do that type of thing. So I had a student a couple of years ago, and every one of his journal entries was about how much he liked to party. Okay, and he thought it was funny. He talked about, drinking and smoking and all of these things, which is fine. I'm not under any impression that those things don't happen, right? And that high school kids aren't doing those things. I would not encourage you to do them, first and foremost, okay? But I'm not, I know that they happen. And so I pulled him aside and I asked him, I said, why is that the message that you want to send to everybody? He's like, what are you talking about? It's just who I am. I said, well, that's what everybody knows you as because that's all you share with them, right? I knew him to be some other things. Ridiculously brilliant when it came to reading and writing. A fantastic artist. Because I would see all his projects because he had art class after mine and he would come in and bring them in. And I said, why don't you want anyone to know that about you? Why would you choose the worst part of your personality, of who you are, and that would be what you put on display for everyone? And no one knows that you're a fabulous artist. No one knows that you're a brilliant writer and a thinker. Can you add that to our class? And this young man tried throughout the rest of that year and did a pretty good job. But the greatest thing about all this is that every day you can choose. You can choose the messages that you want to put on social media. You can choose how you want to carry yourself in front of your teachers and your friends. And this can be a hard thing to do. I'm going to give you three reasons that I think, not reasons, I would call them 3 points that I think you could follow in order to be better communicators in the sense that you have a better message, you've crafted a better message to share with people. The first point I want to make is that you need to be authentic. So many teenagers work so hard on being different. And these aren't just teenagers, these are people, I should say. So many people work so hard on being different that they forget to be authentic. What's the difference, you may be asking? The difference is this. Someone who is authentic is true to who they are, has the courage to love what they love and be who they are despite what anybody else thinks about it. The reason that's not always being different is because maybe they love that thing that everyone else loves. I always go to music, right? There are people who are always searching for those indie bands, and some of them are just god-awful, but they are searching for them, right? Because it makes them different. And if there's something that's mainstream that they like, they're going to say, oh, I don't like that. Too many people like that. But they may actually love it and secretly listen to it on the way home in the car, right? So to be authentic is not necessarily to be different. It's to be brave and have the courage to learn and discover who you are and who you want to be. And that takes courage. In my life, it has been a very difficult thing to find out what I wanted to do. I did not become a teacher until I was 30 years old. I paid the tuition at USC to become a broadcast journalist and lasted about 2 years, and then, I will be paying back my college tuition until I'm dead. But I became a teacher because I, at a certain point, had to understand I needed to have the courage to do that. And to be authentic to myself, it was something that I had been passionate about doing since I was in high school, something that I had wanted to do. Okay? The second thing, once you've discovered who you are, and it's a work in progress, we're all works in progress. So be patient with yourselves. But once you've discovered who you are and who you want to be, you need to craft a message. Define your message. What is it that you want other people to know about you? And this message should be the same things that make you proud of who you are. Who you are and what you want to be. Does it make you proud? If the answer is yes, that should be the definition of the message that you want other people to know. Okay? And again, all of this is pre-communication. I think that was covered greatly by our friends from Comedy Sports and from the previous speaker, right? How to actually communicate that message. But defining that message is just as important. And lastly, once you've defined the message, before you share it with anyone, you need to ask yourself this question. By sharing this message, am I adding good to the world? And what I mean by that is, does this message uplift or does it tear other people down? And if it tears other people down, I would suggest you don't share it. And if it lifts them up, share it with everyone that you know. And the way that that starts is by learning and understanding who you are, what you want to be, and what makes you proud about that person. So many times it can be difficult for us to acknowledge and recognize our strengths. That is the very basis of carefully considered communication. What makes you awesome? What makes you fantastic? It's so easy when we look in the mirror in the morning to point out all of the things where we fall short. And I do this too. But it does take real bravery sometimes to honestly discover what about yourself you're proud of. And then to share that with other people. It's so important to have a message that is carefully considered, because then we have something to communicate with the world that's worth sharing. Whether it's on social media, whether it's in class, in a journal, in your English classroom, wherever it may be. And I can guarantee you that at a certain point in your life, this message of value that you've now defined for yourself is going to need to be heard by someone else. And I would ask you to have the courage and the bravery to share it at that moment, because in that way we uplift one another, and honestly, as idealistic as it may sound, the world becomes a better place. Lastly, I'll say this. We don't always do it 100%, and sometimes we make mistakes. Be able to forgive yourself and continually work on crafting your message. Find your value, define the message, be who you are, and have the courage to share it with other people. Thank you.
All right, so as we conclude, there are some people we would like to thank for making this entire talk possible. So the first people we would like to thank are our speakers, Molly DeSimone, Jack Drinker, Toby Kamish, and Cameron Shao.
We'd also like to thank our Mayor's Youth Council marketing team, including Iman Bakit, Emma Doyle, Sean Kennedy, Blake Larita, Nadia Owen, Michael Zucker, and Isabella G.
We'd also like to thank the tech staff, Mr. Jordal, and we'd like to thank everyone for coming out today. And the next talk is on the benefits of failure, which is next Wednesday during PM office hours as well.
2 Wednesdays.
Just to clarify, it's 2 Wednesdays from now.
Sorry.
March 21st, PM office hours, 2 Wednesdays from now on March 21st. All right.
Okay,
Thank you for
you.
coming.